Much to Conversations, where I am very pleased to welcome to the program Vance Packard. And Vance Packard may be our leading sociologist in the United States, if I may say so, and has written a really very interesting book, The Ultra-Rich. And Mr. Packard, welcome very much to Conversations indeed.
Well, thank you. I'm a social observer more than a sociologist. I enjoy the flattery of being called a sociologist.
Oh, that would be a flattery to be called a sociologist. Yeah. You had written, of course, the Hidden Persuaders and the Status Weakers, and a whole series of books that have looked at the American and the world society, particularly the American society over the years.
I've written 10 books that all are focused on what's happening to the individual and our society in the face of rapid social change and rapid technological change.
You live in a good time to try and study rapid technological change, because the pace of change is so quickly, is so fast now. Unprecedented. I suppose the Chinese used to say, help us from living in interesting times, but the pace of change and the technological pace of innovation is coming now almost exponentially. I mean, in the time in which you and I live and talk.
It certainly is, and it's, technological change is so rapid that it's got even the United States worried, I think, that we're not catching up.
Yeah, to catch up in terms of being able to stay on the leading edge of production economically, and so the Japanese and the Eastern Basin is doing so well now compared to it was. If I may, maybe we can go back over your history if we can. It's a rich history and illuminates the language and understanding I can remember very well. The first book you came, was it the Hidden Persuaders? Was the first book that hit
the first was the Hidden Persuaders, and then I did the Status Seekers and then the Waste Makers, which was kind of taking the Hidden Persuaders more in depth, and then I did a book about executives, how they're changing, and pyramid climbers. Then I did the Naked Society, about the loss of privacy in our society, the sexual wilderness, about the change in male-female relationships, A Nation of Strangers, which I think probably my best book, was on the impact of all the mobility and the social fragmentation on everyday life. And then the People Shapers and the Our Endangered Children, and finally my last book, the Ultra-Rich, How Much is Too Much, a study of our reward system at the highest level, because this represents our reward system indicates our priorities, what we consider to be important, and obviously we consider it very important to make enormous payoffs to the few lucky people, not few, but the people at the top who they're gaining in wealth much more rapidly than the rest of the population is, and it's a sort of a hazardous situation for us as a society, as they're trading off more of our wealth into their power. Mm-hmm. It's up to 34% of all the wealth, private wealth in the country, is now controlled by 1% of the people.
Yes,
and that is
owned by.
That's a very high percentage. And the average over 100 years is about 27%, and at the time of the crash in 1929, it got up just 2 points higher than it is today.
Yeah.
And so that it's a thing to worry about if you believe in historical trends.
Yeah, R.I.P. has written on this,
yes.
And you do quote him in your book, The Great Depression of 1990, and Surviving the Great Depression of 1990, which he sees coming. He actually, I think, we did an interview a few months ago with him, he actually thinks it's getting up close to 36% of the ownership now is held by the upper 1% of the population. And it's that ownership question is perhaps more interesting and important than the income distribution. And it's a dangerous trend, and there's a concentration of wealth and ownership at the top within the American society. Do you think the concentration of wealth in the American society is characteristic of societies around the world, that there's a leading class of people that tend to control maybe 5% or upper 5% of the people do it? Or is the United States particularly marked that way? Or what is it, or have you thought?
Well,
you haven't had occasion to think on a world scale how the United States fits in.
The United States obviously has more a conspicuous group of enormously rich people. And in general, the European countries don't, or the Japanese don't make extraordinary rewards in the hundreds of millions. They have a few that may get up there, but it's just a handful of people. It's not dozens, it's not hundreds. But here in the United States now we're getting up into the thousands of people who have up in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're talking about someone that's got, say, $500 million, you're talking about someone that's got at least 10,000 times as much wealth as the average American.
Yes.
Now, is there any individual that needs 10,000 times as much wealth as the average American? And is anyone worth, does anyone have a talent that's worth $100 million? Or is anyone worth $100 million worth of luck?
Yeah, uh-huh.
It's a provocative question, and it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it raises a lot of interesting questions that you raise in the book and so forth. And then you took it upon yourself. You've been working on this book, The Ultra Rich, again. You've been working on this book for a number of years, been researching and finding out the nature of who the people are, and then you took it upon yourself to go out, contact them, and actually go out and talk to some of these people to find out what kind of personality traits there were and what some of the characteristics of those.
Well, I wanted to. I had the factual information of what was going on, and but I didn't have any very good feel of how these people were using this enormous reward, what they were doing with the money, what they thought about it, and that was quite revealing to me that they weren't using it at all. I mean, by and large, I talked to 30 people who had an average wealth of $330 million each.
Wow, that's an awful lot of money.
And they represented people from all parts of the country and all kinds of industries and all kinds of ways to make money. And one of the questions I asked them was, in terms of their own life, what was their annual budget for living expenses for the family, total budget, everything they spent, any conceivable way, that personal expenditure. And 21 of the 30 were living on less than $1 million a year. So it's ludicrous, preposterous. Here they have an average of $330 million, and they're living on less than one. So the rest of it's mostly in land that they've been told that's the best place to keep their money, or in utility stocks. It's not, the money is not by and large used in ways that are creative for or productive for our economy. Not highly productive. Maybe in a mild way productive, but not. We have such urgent needs for using whatever money we have for the challenges we have to create new industries and to solve some of our very urgent social problems, like developing new sources of energy before we run out.
Absolutely.
That I think that our system needs to start rewarding people who will put their money, venture capital, in these areas. And I think that I think our tax system should be encouraging these rich people to do that with their excess when they get above, say, 25 million or something. But they shouldn't be allowed just to give it to their kids. Give $200 million to the kids and let the kids sit on it and land too. Yeah,
right. Because the money, you get to a certain point, the money would be accumulating. I don't know what the average accumulation rate of money in the American economy is. Maybe 10% conservative or something like that a year. And when you've got that amount of money, the money building up that you can't spend goes back into to compound the thing. So they can't possibly spend the amount of money that the money itself earns. Money does earn money in this particular economy. Yeah.
Most of these people they're going up 50 to 100 million a year, and they couldn't conceivably live on it. And I mean, it's even Donald Trump doesn't spend that much.
Yeah, you can't possibly spend it, and so they've got it left over. It makes a question of what does it mean that it is so concentrated. Why do you think it is that after 1929 we reached, as you say, 36%? There was a speculative bubble and boom, and there was a great crash and so forth. Ravi Batra, among others, says that we're heading in the same 60-year cycle. But why do you think it is that there has been this accumulation of ownership at the top echelons, our upper 1%, in the recent experience? Do the tax policies of Mr. Reagan, the supply side philosophy,
that was very important,
and so forth? How does it come that we have this increased concentration of wealth?
There was a trend toward equalitarianism of wealth for about 30 years after World War II, and then this 27% got down to about 24% actually. But in I think around 1977 or 78, the thing very dramatically changed, and by the time Mr. Reagan got in, it was going up quite rapidly, and he helped it along both with his very permissive policies in terms of deregulation and laying off on taxes, letting the rich pay very little in terms of taxes. And this has encouraged them, plus the more basic changes in the economy, the fact that a lot of new wealth has been created by the fact that rapid transportation and rapid communication makes it possible for change to explode. Chain stores, chain media change. And this is where many of the new fortunes are made, these chain things, because they can explode rapidly. And they can make a man, in 5 years, they can take him from zero to $200 or $300 million.
You found instances of that in these people you investigated.
This guy Millard out in California, the Computerland software guy, he went from zero to 600 million in about 5 years.
Good heavens, yeah.
And he's come down since because he got piggish, but it's possible. And also the shrinkage of available land has run up land values so that a whole host of people in our society can make fortunes just on land, real estate, the appreciation of real estate values.
Great number of people have done that, haven't they? Here,
Harry
Helmsley here in New York.
He has over $1.5 billion, and he said he just laughs at it to make money. He said you just have to sit there. The money goes up, and if you're in the right place at the right time. In time in history, that the money's going to keep going anyhow.
You have to be clever and you have to do the right thing. You had a piece in there about a man who was involved with Battery Park City and had done a great deal
Sam
of...
LaFrock, yeah.
LaFrock, right? Yeah. He's a major real estate and developer and so forth. And these people are they're contributing in many cases to creation of new living and so forth, and they're contributing to the economy. The entrepreneurial spirit, we don't want to cut off the entrepreneurial spirit, and that motivates people to grow and can benefit the society, but it can get out of hand, or it can get beyond the point where it really serves well the broad society.
These people, when they get up after $10 million, most of the people, the way they explain it to me, they were not interested in the money. They'll say frankly that they're just interested in the game of making money, the process of doing it. And the money is simply a way to keep score, and it gives them a way to keep score. They wouldn't, even if they get to $1 billion, they want another few hundred million. It's not greed. It's just they don't want to give up. They love the sense of accumulation, and they keep thinking that I think that as long as their wealth is growing, they're going to keep living.
It's a kind of thing like that. Yeah. Right.
It's a part of life, and God is not going to take life away from them while they're still growing in terms of economic strength.
Did you find certain characteristics of people or that were characteristic of the people who make these enormous fortunes? They have a great deal of thrust or drive, or were there a wide variety of characteristics and attitudes toward wealth and so forth?
That's true that's true of all successful executives. They have a great deal of thrust, a great deal of drive. But it was very conspicuous to me among the self-made men that I talked with, and women that I talked with. The people who inherited their money they don't have the same thrust. They're more passive characters.
They tend to be more passive than the others, and
they treat their money more niggardly and more. They're worried about losing the money, and they have all sorts of lawyers protecting them, and they tend to take a very defensive attitude toward the money and keep it in safe places like land.
They tend to do that rather than to be more expansive with it and more entrepreneurial and so forth. And yet there is this accumulation of wealth, and the wealth accumulating capability of wealth itself gives a tremendous advantage. There's an old saying that came out of the Depression or something: "Them that has gets, and them that doesn't gets babies," or something. But the amount of money that comes from money itself, and the money earning capability of capital, is quite incredible, and probably not well enough understood in our society, the importance of that. I mean, so those at the top do have an accumulation of wealth. It gets larger and larger and larger, and that is the tendency.
That's what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, and if to carry it out, you also discussed, if I may, particularly toward the end of the book, where you talk about some solutions to this. You very interestingly deal with the individuals on an individual basis, having visited with them, given some characteristics of their personalities and so forth. Then you also deal with some of the questions of what might be able to be, how we might collectively as a society address some of the problems that this has. And one of the people you talk about is Louis Kelso, common acquaintance and friend that you and I have, and his ESOP movement, where he has over the years been saying there ought to be a wide distribution of income as an instrument of income, of ownership as an instrument of income distribution. But the ESOP, the employee stock ownership movement, is one thing that you see that is something that perhaps might be encouraged to move the society in the right direction?
Well, obviously it should be anyhow, but I think that I think we should be encouraging these people of enormous wealth to, when they die and end up trying to pass their money on to their kids. And they're not really, most of them, trying to form dynasties. They just want to pass the money along, which sort of represents to them their mortality or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that we should have a tax system that encourages people to contribute to plans like the ESOPs that make the employees fellow capitalists in the companies. And if you do, you get immediately, almost invariably, you get more productive employees if they think if they're in the company themselves. Mm-hmm. They are more helpful and they work harder and they're more productive. And this is throughout the nation. I think one of the exciting things that's happened in this country is this growth of every man a capitalist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Of expanding.
ESOPs, yeah,
the ESOP is one aspect of that, and it underscores the fact that, and you've been interested back again to your original theme of the individual in a technologically expanding society. One of the points Louis Kelso makes is that technology itself, and now we see robotics and other things coming, technology itself is increasingly, or has been increasingly, responsible for the actual production of goods
yes.
and services.
Yes.
And who owns the technology ought to have a return in a private property economy by the fact that they own that. It would be a good thing perhaps to have greater numbers of people have ownership as a way of having income rather than only wages, which is the case of most of the people in the economy, if you understand what I'm
Sure, I do.
saying.
Yes. I think it should be sweeping a country. It is actually. I think in a matter of a few years, at least a fourth of all our economy will be in companies that have this concept of employee sharing and ownership.
Employee sharing in the ownership, and they could even expand it out to employ some of the infrastructure. And the general, if I may, and I don't want to get into the, necessarily the theme of your book or anything like that, but the general idea that citizens could think about having income for their life's purposes the same way a capitalist, or who has a great deal of capital, will have income come to them each month, having earned maybe 10% on an annual basis or something conservative. That income comes to them for life's purposes because they have a capital ownership of the technology. That principle might well be established to greater numbers of people in ours. Very few people, I think, tend to live by dividend or live by the fact that they get a return on their capital ownership, and it's a principle that could be politically one that presidential candidates and others could think about, perhaps.
I agree with you, yes.
And they haven't sufficiently thought of that, and most people still think in terms of only wages as a way of gaining income.
Yes.
It would be a major sociological or economic change. Your book, The Ultra Rich, took you how many years? You've been working on that for many years.
4 years, I guess, yeah. I traveled all over 17,000 miles, I guess, to see these people, and they're pretty hard to find, and it was. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, they're hard to find. They tend to not necessarily be looking for publicity and so forth. They tend to be...
Most of them are fairly modest people and live fairly simple lives. And I talked with people that, for example, I'll take William Caruth down in Dallas. He it was called Mr. North Dallas. In Texas, he had 30,000 acres. Spread of land. That's not much in Texas, but his happened to be right there in North Dallas, and so it didn't take real brilliance for him to, and he says it didn't take real brilliance to make a fortune on this. But he, when I went to see him, he was living in a house that was on a street back about 30 yards from the street, and I could see when I stopped my car right in front of his house, I could look in his living room. A lot of these people have security arrangements. There's no security arrangement there. I could see him sitting in one corner of the living room, his wife in the other, and they were watching television, the night television show.
Just like anybody else on Elm Street.
He was in the shirt sleeves, and I went in, and they had she'd cooked them supper. He likes her cooking, and she'd cook meatloaf for supper. And they talked about the fact that when they go out to dinner, they often go to a Mexican place that 3 blocks over. They're crazy about Mexican food, and you don't get very many fancy restaurants or Mexican restaurants in the United States. And this wasn't a fancy restaurant. He likes beef stew. He likes the place. Another restaurant has beef stew that he's just crazy about. And they go to Florida, to a place they have over there on the north coast of Florida, because they just want to go away from Dallas, because everyone knows that they're rich in Dallas and the people in Florida don't. And he said, the people in Florida don't know that we're a Caruth. It doesn't mean a damn thing to them. Well, anyhow, he has, well, I don't know how many hundreds of millions right now, but and he tried to give it to his kids, but and he's very disappointed about 3 things in life. One is that it became hard for him to develop real friendships, because everybody he knew, he had to wonder whether they're cultivating him in order to get loans from. Or
yeah, you spoke about another fellow, Bancroft, who was out living out in the Southwest, and he had the same problem?
They have the same problem. You can't tell who's a friend or who's just trying to hit you for a loan or to go in shares with you on some sort of project.
Yeah, they must get a lot of that. It must be
not loans, but I'm giving you a chance to get in on something good.
Yeah, right.
Ever since I got this book, I've gotten a lot of mail and telephone calls from people People want me to introduce these people. I had someone from Seattle last night called me and wanted me to introduce some of these people, and it's ridiculous. But anyhow, Mr. Caruth was upset about friendship. He was upset. His relationship with his family were wrecked in terms of his mother. His brother-in-law fought all the way. Has fought for 15 years about the way that Mr. Caruth has handled the estate, because the father gave William Caruth control of the estate in terms because he thought he was a good manager, and the son-in-law or the brother-in-law has fought him, lose lawsuits. It's been very mean and nasty, and then his sons. He has 4 sons, and they've been big disappointments to him because they don't want to. They're not even interested in taking over the role of running this empire. And he said they couldn't anyhow. They haven't bothered to get the training for it. They wouldn't know how to do it. So he's quite turned off on the whole idea of wealth.
Yeah, right. He's turned off on the whole idea of wealth. And I wonder if you got around to talking to many of those people about how they feel about that wealth, whether or not, because there's a great deal of, there's batteries of lawyers that help them protect. Very often these people do not, given our tax structure, pay individually taxes and so forth, and whether they feel a sense of social responsibility or generally what their attitude is toward that.
Well, they have
question, They
tend to have a very low attitude in terms of social responsibility, as do most of us, I guess, but I don't think they're any more than anyone else, because they think that they're giving $100,000 to some institution. It's an awful lot of money, because they used to think that $100,000 is a lot of money. But actually, for the average American, that's $10. Same thing.
In a ratio or something.
Ratio,
yeah,
right. 1 to 10,000. And very few of them give even $1 million to any particular thing. And that would be $100 for you and me. I give $100 to a lot of things, and more than $100,000.
Yeah, Ravi Batra pointed that out in his book, that many of the rich, they give the least. I mean, the people that are the richest give the least in terms of charity and that sort of thing. And they are, as you used to put it, niggardly very often in terms of that, and are protecting it and have to have lawyers to help them protect from a society they think is trying to take away from, including the Internal Revenue Service.
And the lawyers think they're earning the money by saving them on their taxes. And I think it gets back to the fact that originally we had to pay taxes to the British or something, because I think in America there's more pathological hatred about paying taxes, totally unrealistic, than any place else in the world. Down in Dallas, they're just pathological about having to pay taxes, and yet Texas is right in bed with the federal government on every big project.
Yeah, they're getting things back all the time from the federal government. I mean,
all sorts of hundreds of billions of dollars, and federal government goes in there.
Yeah, and then when they put the tax, 28% and so forth, and the supply side, 1980, the tax law of 1981, the tax law of 1986, these have benefited generally the people at the higher levels of our society, so that it made it easier for them to keep their wealth, and the administration apparently was trying to encourage entrepreneurial something or development or something. I wonder if you comment on that, the attitude over these last, since Mr. Reagan was
that was his idea. His friends were all rich, and he thought everyone, and he thought it was a good idea for everyone to try to be rich, and maybe it is, but if you get everyone, everyone can't be rich, and the pie's only so big. And if the rich are getting an awful big piece of the pie, then the rest of us are getting less.
Yeah.
And a lot of evidence that, by and large, the average American is in actual living standards is going down rather than up. If you take into consideration inflation, and if you take into consideration the very great growth of two paycheck families, they feel like there's a little more money coming in, but it's both this two income and the inflation that accounts for it. Actual living standards, according to the Department of Labor, been going down last 4 years. The average American, or the American with a medium income can no longer afford to buy a median-priced house. A median-priced house in America requires $40,000 income to get a mortgage on it.
Right. I can remember when a house was just something that everybody got. It was relatively.
You got to have $40,000 income to even qualify for a mortgage.
Yeah.
Now, most Americans don't have $40,000 income.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And so it's making it more and more difficult because they're taking it from, and then not to mention in New York City, homelessness and so forth. In a society that is as rich as this, there's really something rotten in Denmark.
I've been going through Grand Central Station in New York for 50 years, 60 years. And it's the most beautiful railroad station in the world. And I went through the other day, and it just stunned all the people laying around on the floor. Dozens and dozens of people just laying on the corners, sleeping there.
And in your estimate, this is an outgrowth of the tax policies and so forth that have been encouraged?
Well, Mr. Reagan took a rather harsh view toward the homeless. He didn't think they were homeless. He thought that there were places for them if they looked around, or they just didn't look hard enough.
They didn't look hard enough, and then also thinking if they
could... he cut the money available for emergency housing.
And then also, I think probably the attitude is that the private sector could do things well. All ships will rise if you let the economy go. We have been in an economy expansion and so forth, but not all the ships have risen. There's still a lot of people who have been left behind, and there's this incredible concentration of wealth at the top of the pillar. What about the idea? Is there's a question of Robbie Bottra's brought it up and others, the idea of a tax on wealth, a wealth tax. There are some interpretations of the constitutions that would make that something difficult, but there are some people who are working on trying to see a means by which this incredible wealth could be taxed in a reasonable way, which could very help reduce the deficit and build social equity and strength and so forth. Wouldn't even be missed by many of those people. But what is the status of the possibility of there being, in a constitutional way, a tax upon wealth as a basis for taxation in our society?
Most people don't realize it, but there's no tax in America on the total net assets of anyone.
Many of those people in your book paid no income tax whatsoever. None.
They don't pay income tax. They don't have income.
Yeah, right.
They can turn the faucet on or off.
Well, they pay no tax. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
But anyhow, in Europe, there are many countries that have direct tax on the net worth of people, that are wealth taxes. In the Founding Fathers, in writing the Constitution, it was a weird, one of the less glorious chapters. It was partly an argument over the slave states, and it came out of the slave states. They wanted to count their slaves as people. They finally worked out a formula that they would count as 3/5 of a person. But to lure the South into agreeing to go along with the Constitution, they wrote in that any direct tax on wealth or on money would have to be apportioned in proportion to the numbers of the states, which meant, to translate it, that the average person in Mississippi has to pay the same amount in tax as the average person in Connecticut.
Yeah, okay.
Now that's crazy, because the average person in Connecticut has 3 times as much money as the average person in Mississippi.
Yeah.
But that was to try to keep the states equal, and there was rivalry among the states. So it's ludicrous. We couldn't even have an income tax law until we wrote the 16th Amendment because of this thing in the Constitution.
And that went back to Article 1 in the Constitution?
Yes, Article 1, it's the third thing in the Article 1.
Now, there was a change in the interpretation of Article 1 that allowed the income tax to come in?
They had to modify it, yes.
But there hasn't been a change yet that would allow us to have a wealth tax in constitutional terms?
You can change it in one sentence, one short sentence, but it'll take a while.
Uh-huh.
So you think you're getting a wealth tax when you tax real estate, but that's one way of taxing the total assets of a person. Because they got most of the money in real estate. But actually the real estate tax is not a tax on an individual, it's a tax on the land. Mm-hmm. If you have a $200,000 house and you got a $190,000 mortgage on it, you still have to pay tax on the $200,000 because that's the real estate that's involved. Mm-hmm. So it's not a direct tax in that sense. Or another way they get around it is the transfer tax. That is when money passes from parent to child, or any kind of an inheritance. There's they call that it's a direct tax in a sense, but they call it a transfer tax. And that was one of the suggestions I make in the book. That
yes.
I'm not suggesting we hit these birds with their hundreds of millions of dollars directly, but I don't think that given the poor way that most of them are investing their money in terms of the bulk of their money in terms of the productive needs of our country and the urgent social needs of their country, I think that they should be encouraged to be forced to commit, if they're going to pass this money on to their kids, and if you're getting up, say, more than 25 million you're going to pass on to the kids, I think that you should start taxing this money if they don't commit to make a commitment to put the money in a productive investment, such as the venture capital in new industries or venture capital in socially important areas of our economy.
Why do they tend not to do that? They want to be absolutely sure, and they're worried about, they don't have a venturesome spirit, or they don't care.
Well, they fall in the hands of investment counselors who know how to play it safe and are very defensive. And we have an urgent need right now for finding new sources for energy. It's desperate that we're going to be running out of energy in the next several years. And yet very little money is being spent on this. I think that the people who've got all these hundreds of millions should be encouraged to spend some of this money and things like that.
What about using the government education? We certainly have our education and our infrastructure is falling apart. We have many needs in this country, which very often involves the government, and there could be taxation that could be used to put through government intervention into the marketplace of ideas and so on. Do you understand that the government could be greater able to bring things that would serve the broad social fabric?
What I'm saying is, if these people want to pass more than 25 million on to their kids, they should make a commitment that the money is going to be spent in socially useful ways.
Okay, there should be a difference in our inheritance tax system and our inheritance tax, and that's something that you think is something that, is there a widespread support for that, do you think, for the
Well, it's been discussed. I haven't...
Somebody's got to bring it up, right? Yeah.
As far as I know, I'm the first one that brought it up, but it's been discussed.
A good deal of the people who have these super wealth are done in trusts and so forth, and is done by inheritance. A great number of them do it by inheritance apart from the entrepreneurs. A great deal of these massive fortunes are by inheritance, right?
That's correct. I shouldn't say I was the first, but I'm the first one to advocate the specific tax that I did. It has been kicked around as an idea, but not very much because of the constitutional prohibition. You
said there'd be one sentence in the Constitution that would change it and make it. What is the sentence?
Well, just like this, exactly a repeating of the 16th Amendment, which takes away that there has to be a portion according to the respective numbers.
If there could be a tax on wealth over, let's say, I don't know, 2%, 3%, but Robbie Vatra said 2-3% tax on over a certain amount of the net worth of the super incomes, super wealth, it would be hardly missed.
No, it wouldn't be.
The amount of money that's coming in is there, and yet it could go a long way toward meeting like deficit problems and other kinds of things. It would realize a tremendous amount of income. It's not a small amount of income. All the tax about, they want to tax consumption, they want to tax the general society. The idea that there could be a tax upon the wealth, those who have inordinately benefited from the growth of the society, is one that might well be taken up. There's a professor of law, if I'm not mistaken, Lindholm or something, at Oregon.
Yes.
He's working on that, and maybe you could share some of his work and so forth.
Well, he's
laying the groundwork for...
What is interesting is that he's being sponsored. He is sponsored by Sol Price, who is a centimillionaire and out in California. The Price.
He's one of the few who thought there should be more taxation.
Yeah, the Price puts, he's a discounter, and he thinks it's ridiculous that he and these other people should be keeping this money and giving it to their kids. He doesn't believe that they should give it to his kids or his grandchildren. He thinks it's better for the grandchildren if they get maybe $1 million or a few million, but nothing big at all. And he's very much in favor of, he'll give his money to the federal government. He says it's been a good government, and then why not? He doesn't have this pathological hatred of the government. Two or three of the people I talk with are perfectly happy to give the money to the government.
They are happy to give their fair share or something
well,
like that?
Everything. They'd rather give it to the government than give it to the kids. It just spoils the kids.
It is interesting.
And they're not interested in building dynasties. They're realistic. There are very few dynasties are okay if you're involved in a fruit packing company in Birmingham or something like that. You can keep a family thing going. But when you get up into complex corporations and you try to keep a dynasty going, you get into all sorts of problems of needing skills that aren't available in the family, and you get into conflict among the family members on who's going to run the thing, and you get into conflict with the family members on whether they want to make the profit now or whether they go for long-term gains. And you get these fights going and blood all over the aisle.
So, but he was the exception in a certain sense. Among most of them, they would be tending to think better not to pay taxes and so forth, and it's a general attitude of the people are, they're very favored by the society and so forth. They have a great number of people who must be sycophant to them because they have tremendous power and wealth. I suppose there are many people even politically have to be answerable to that. Do they tend to represent, do you think, in terms of the national priorities and setting an establishment of the national agenda? Do they tend to be active that way or not? Or is the political leadership of the nation and the intellectual leadership of the nation apart from that? And in what kind of a relationship does the political and the intellectual leadership, as it were, have to these centers of great power and wealth in this very highly materialistic society that we live in? Do they set the national agenda in their thinking?
Well, only in areas that are important to them, such as their power to use to get favorable situations for their industries. But by and large, they're not ambitious politically. I think that's good. They're not interested in political power per se. Only, I think, but they are making killings on using their wealth in abusive ways in this whole takeover thing. There's been a very close parallel between the explosion of centimillionaires and the explosion of this takeover explosion. And that's the reason for that, of course, that these people are especially favored to play this game because they don't need to go before boards and act carefully and get things approved. They can sneak in on a company and take over 5% of the company before anyone knows what's going on, and they just say boo, and when they've got 5%, and then everyone has to guess, are they serious about this or are they bluffing? And everyone assumes they're serious, and so the stock zooms and they sell out. Donald Trump made $122 million just playing this game as a hobby.
Yeah.
He wasn't serious in any of it.
And does any of this add to the national product, as it were? Does it add to the expansion of the economy?
Well,
it's supposed to be that there will be some of this trickling down, and it will, you know, and Adam Smith would have said, let them loose, let them run entrepreneurial, let them run free enterprise, laissez-faire, let them run, and it will benefit the society in the whole if they could pursue their own selfish interests and so forth. And in your view, perhaps it doesn't work.
In theory, I guess they say in theory that a company is most efficient if it's run most restlessly in terms of eliminating costs and things like that. And these things, the first thing they do is get in there and start firing people in order to make it more profitable. But they also, what they also do, of course, is they immediately run the company away into debt. And it's a vicious thing to a company because it destroys the morale of a company to have this thing hanging over the company. I've seen lots of companies where the morale is just shattered by these takeover battles. And then the company doesn't dare make any long-term planning because they don't know how long they're going to be around. And furthermore, it's the public should be furious about it because they're using these things as tax dodges and getting out of paying taxes, and they're letting, so that the public has to come in and pay the taxes on what they've saved.
And yet the public tends to set these people up as almost quasi-heroes and so forth. And what does that say about us collectively, sociologically, or where we are? And do you think it's changed over the last, let's say, you've been viewing things for a long period of time, many decades, the last 10, 20 years, has it changed considerably, the national thinking about, have we become more materialistic than we were, say, 20 years ago? And how can we account for that? Is it our political leadership? Is it swings that Mr. Schlesinger talks about? Can we begin to see changes, or how in a long-term view do we see, because this isn't serving well the society, our society, in terms of equity and, you know, in terms of society, or national well-being in terms of the way people feel about themselves and so forth. It's not particularly healthy now.
Well, we have had this materialistic swing, just as Mr. Schlesinger would say. I don't know how long, I hope we're topping out on it. I think that we're being forced to by the present economic trends and the deficit. But yes, we have been in a highly materialistic phase, a great glorifying of me first, a great glorifying of get your money and the hell with the rest of everybody else. And I think it's urgently close to, I mean, it's time now that we think more in terms of social well-being for the whole society. Countries, their reward systems kind of set their priorities on what's important. And for example, Sweden, the Swedes go along and pay 30–40% taxes. They not only pay, they vote every year for taxes on 30–40% on themselves because they know the result is a lifestyle that they love, where everyone is well taken care of, and then where everyone still has an opportunity. They don't make the hundreds of millions. You don't have any centimillionaires, or maybe one in all of Sweden. But by and large, they have a level of living that's way above it here in America. And they know that, and they're just being more perceptive than we are. And we're more fascinated with everyone making as much as you can, and the hell with the next guy.
I wonder if it's a long-term characteristic of this from de Tocqueville's day or something on, or if it's just a passing phase or a cycle, or if we'd be able to, is it a quality of the political and intellectual leadership that calls for new ideas and possibilities, and whether it reflects an insecurity on the part of the society, or why this would be there, you know?
It's always been here in America as a part of the American dream, I guess. A lot of the people who came here were out to make money, and they were all refugees. A lot of them were just wanted to have a chance to get in an environment where there was no control over their making wealth, or very little control.
Well, you know, it's hard to know how that's, you know, where that's all going. Do you think that this idea of a tax on the wealth is something that's really worthwhile for some of our political leadership to pick up?
Well, I hope so.
It seems to be just dismissed by so many people as something that can be done. The tax only has to come out of the mass of the society. I mean, and yet taxing the wealth could have a popular support that might touch a wellspring of people if they could gather the possibility that that is something that could be done.
Some of the reviewers just said, no, it's not realistic, of course, but why is it not realistic?
Yeah, why isn't it? Yeah. Well, they say it isn't realistic, perhaps because we have...
They're thinking, they just don't, it involves a new way to think about our economy.
Or maybe we tend to think pyramid. You had a book, pyramid, and so we have a pyramid of this tremendous, again, over a third of all assets in the United States owned by 1% of the population. They tend to be very powerful people. They tend to have circles of people around them who must be sycophant to them. They must be sycophant. And many of the people just tend to think that they set the pattern, whatever they want, we have to adjust to. But in real terms, there could be a change in our attitude toward that. The people themselves, you found Sol Price and others, are there other people who address this maybe from a wider perspective, a sociological, spiritual perspective, who view this issue, and perhaps even among the echelons themselves, who would see the need for there to be some sort of a change from the situation such as we have now? I mean, among the people in those upper echelons themselves.
Well, I think there's a substantial amount of guilt up there that
maybe they don't see an alternative or something that
they don't
they
see
can
a
feel
realistic way.
comfortable.
They don't see a realistic way that they can start sharing their wealth unless it's imposed on them by they're not going to start giving away. Well, some of them will when they die, but there's just no. They lack a leadership from a federal government that moves in and says that there's no reason why that they should be taking these hundreds of millions and passing it on to their snotty-nosed kids who are only going to be spoiled by it.
Yeah, that's interesting. You found that they do tend to be spoiled, and you think people tend to think in their mythology that if they have money, they're going to be happy. But many of the kids who inherited that are profoundly unhappy.
Well, of the 30 people I saw, 16 of them, that's the majority, involve families in divorce, and that means you got a fragmentation right there. How are you going to have a dynasty if you got divorced? Usually the kids, if the wife has taken the kid and gone off to the east or gone off to the west or gone to Alaska to raise the kid, and so the kid is not even raised by the father who in most cases has made the money. And so there's not a, this is just the slice I made, and I wasn't even thinking of divorce when I did the slice. And this was, and yet the majority were involved in divorce, and so you got very little chance of a dynasty in a situation like that.
And you got a little chance of a dynasty, and that's more characteristic of the society as a whole. Again, back to that question of how much of the capital, how much of the production of our overall economy is the result of that capital. You've been studying these things over the years. Is capital itself, or the technology and the wealth invested in capital, in a ratio to labor, or in a ratio to the input of human activity? Is it becoming that we're becoming more and more, the production of our economy is more and more technologically based, and can we see more and more of that as we begin to look at robots and semiconductors and other kinds of things and information and so forth? Is the technology becoming more and more responsible for production in a ratio with human input or labor?
Well, every year the amount of the average worker, the amount of investment in terms of machinery for his job goes up by the hundreds of dollars. So that to support a man in many jobs, it requires maybe $30,000, $40,000 worth of equipment. The average employee, this is going up all the time.
It is. So that actually the technology is more and more important, and the technology is increasingly held by fewer and fewer people.
True.
And that is a problem that we really have to collectively address, particularly if we would allow for some capital formation available to meet some of these crucial questions. As you say, the energy questions, the education, ozone, we've got all kinds of problems that are confronted. We need to, and yet we have a sense of capital shortfall capability for us to do what it is we're collectively capable of doing. You think it's important to try and see if we couldn't build ownership? Again, you said that it was, along perhaps with this wealth tax idea that Lindholm and some of these other people have, but this idea of expanding, seriously expanding the idea of greater numbers of people, perhaps even the majority of people, having a private property holding of capital, so that some of that wealth could be distributed among the general society, and have income come to them other than just wages, and that people could begin to think of having income come to them rather than just through wages or through government transfer payments?
Well, certainly it makes sense economically, and it makes sense in terms of morale of the country. You'd have a much less restless labor force if you had most of the people having a share in ownership of the company they work for. You'd have a whole new situation in terms of motivation, a whole new situation in terms of contentedness.
Why do you think that hasn't occurred, let's say, historically? Why is it that we've come to a situation where we're a capitalist nation, but the capital is all held by the upper 5%? Well, why is it that it's developed that way? It's because income flows to the money itself, and
the people at the top don't want to give it away. They think it's outrageous that they think that the employees are going to get uppity if they give them any share of anything.
The people are going to get uppity if they begin to get a sense of. They'll also give them a sense of freedom from having to answer the.
They wonder if they're going to lose a sense of mastery. It takes a strong man For example, Ewing Kaufman out in the Marion Industries, Marion Laboratories in Kansas City. He's got the most profitable company in America, one of the most profitable, and he's made fantastic money out there, and he has very strong motivation in terms of profit sharing, in terms of stock ownership, and he only owns only a small part of the company, and his employees own more than 40%. They own more than he does. It doesn't worry him. He said they'll still elect me president, and because I know him, because they know I'm for him, and he thinks it's good. But the traditional idea is that you got to be the master, and the master, the servant relationship is where you're most efficient in getting people to do what you want them to do.
Master-slave in a certain relationship. Marxists would used to talk about wage slavery.
Yeah.
We live in a society that couldn't enact a $3.35 wage, a minimum wage or something like that, and so that the need for people to be sycophant in getting their wages only as a way of getting their wages is something that keeps people sociologically, or keeps people in line, as it were, doing what it is they're supposed to be doing, and it's a system of wage slavery that is characteristic of the American society. Do you think the American society is a just one in terms now, in terms of the mass of the society that we have, or not? Mr. Carter at one time said he did not think it fundamentally was just.
I don't think it's fundamentally just. No, I don't think not as much as many other societies. Democracies around the world. There's not the commitment to equality in this country.
And this could come home to roost. On a world scale, we're talking before about the control of the ownership of the wealth in this society relative to the broad society. In another sense, the United States and the Western powers and trilateral nations in relationship to the third world, the developing world, have control of the capital assets on a large scale. Do you think the analogy could be writ large on a world scale, that the control of the wealth producing capability is in far too narrow hands, and there's a need to begin to expand in some equity terms to the underclasses or to the peoples of the world, if we're going to avoid, given chemical warfare and other kinds of tremendous problems of quasi-possible revolution, Robbie-Botryces, a possible economic downturn, but just in terms of the survival of the systems, we need to have some sort of a more equitable view and vision of the world than that which we currently seem to have.
Most of our foreign aid is committed to that philosophy, but we keep pouring money into El Salvador, and it keeps going back to being a right-wing government, and yet we keep pouring money in there and feel bad about it. But our national commitment is toward a democracy in a country that we're trying to help. But realistically, of course, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that we had at the beginning of our republic, we were in a very real sense, we were an economic democracy. Land was widespread and so forth. We still have, everyone has a vote in this country. We're a political democracy in this country, but we're very much of, as you indicate, an economic plutocracy.
Well, we're a land of employees. In Jefferson's time, you had actual capitalists. Everyone had his farm or his store or his blacksmith shop. They were all in business. Mm-hmm. Now you have relatively few people in business.
Yeah, and there's
the whole population.
This tendency to concentrate. And is that an extension of the fact that the technology is increasingly responsible for production? Right?
And the growth of large companies, or growth of companies over 100 employees.
Uh-huh. And do you see that increasing? I mean, that the actual production in the economy of goods and services is going to be technology-based as we begin to move it. One looks at robotics and what it has begun to do and what it could do, and the potentiality of displacing people from that process. And one wonders, again, back, it's how are we going to have distribution of income if it's the wealth is being produced increasingly by the technology? And the logic would be to extend ownership beyond the narrow class that now owns it all.
You're right, yes.
Uh-huh. This book would be one that could help solve the problem of bringing up that issue. It needs to be brought up. I wonder if maybe we could show that now. Could we come in tight on this, please? And let's show, again, it's called The Ultra Rich. And what is the subtitle there?
How much
is too much?
How much is too much?
How much is too much? Did you ever come to a figure in your own mind about how much is too much?
I just said 25 million is too much to give to a kid.
25 million is too much to give to a kid.
Without conditions.
And it might do well for us to be able to try and set up a thing where the wealth and the income producing capability of wealth and assets could be distributed more widely among the society, give people a sense of participation. And you've also created in the book, and that's highly recommended, of course, a number of very, very interesting encapsulations of some of the people who do make up this wealth-owning leadership at the very pinnacle of our society, and I'd like to thank you for that. And I'd particularly like to thank you for coming in and talking to me here on Conversations.
Glad to be here.
I'm very happy to talk to you about the book, and I also want to thank you for all your really pioneering work over the years, incredibly rich addition to understanding that you've contributed to it, and it's your pleasure in the cable television audience to have had the perceptions in of Vance Packard, long and distinguished career and topped now at this point by the book The Ultra Rich. We thank you for viewing and do invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back again next week. Mr. Packard, once again, thanks very, very much for coming by.
I enjoyed it.
Your pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Good night. We'll see you then.
Well, okay. You got more out of me than anyone I've talked to. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We begin to have capital leaving American workers stranded. It's better to have employee ownership than to have closed plants in West Virginia, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan. That employee ownership, stock option plans are very important. It is also important that people have a sense of possession of their homes rather than having monolithic government-style housing. But it's not the same as saying we're going to resolve the problems of inequity entirely through private ownership and the private market. The government did not come into the economy in the United States and Western Europe because people decided that this was a good thing. They didn't even like it. They thought it was necessary because, as John Maynard Keynes said, the private economy simply didn't deliver the goods. And now in this country, it may be delivering the goods after a fashion for perhaps 200 million Americans, but there are a minimum of 50 million Americans for whom the goods are not being delivered. And the private market, it doesn't care about them because as long as the bottom line is fulfilled, 50 million Americans are living tonight under substandard, by the American standard of living, housing, employment, income conditions.
And the best way to address that would be to some politically intervention into the marketplace through what is in the socialist intervention in terms of
a social intervention anyway.
Social value.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think the argument here is that production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services is not the only value. Human life is also a value.
Yeah.
And if those values can be balanced, we might be able to build a rational society. And if we're not going to have a rational society. One of the things we've learned from the experience of the countries that call themselves socialism is that central planning is not enough. We need a market economy.
Okay.
But it doesn't follow that we can do it without some kind of planning, some kind of intervention, and some kind of government